So I experienced my first NDE a few weeks before my 6th birthday. This would have been in the early 1960s, and there was a really severe case of red measles circulating throughout the country. And at that point, there was not a measles vaccine. It was about 2 years before the vaccine was introduced. So a lot of children were becoming ill, and even though I wasn't in school, an older sibling came down with the measles and brought them into the household. And I guess being really, very young, and I was always a tiny child and kind of frail, I developed a really severe case. And at that time, there was not a lot you could do. It was a virus, and basically the doctors told the parents just to keep the child comfortable, and in the event that things worsened to a point that they may appear to be life-threatening, to take the child to the emergency room. So basically it was home care, and my parents moved me into their bedroom so they could sit vigil over me. I was extremely ill, very high temperature, of course the measles covering my body. I recall lying in their bed, and they looked so extremely worried. And I had just experienced, like a year or two before, my grandmother passing away. And I was in the home at the time that she passed. So death was not a new subject for me. I had, experienced my grandmother's passing. And so I felt so extremely sick. I remember my dad leaning over, and I asked him, "Am I going to die?" And he, lifted me up and hugged me and said, "No, you're not going to die." And he laid me back on the pillow, and I closed my eyes. And then when I opened my eyes, the ceiling of their bedroom had basically disappeared. I could see the blue sky, white fluffy clouds, and from amidst these clouds, a hand reached down. And it was like surrounded by brilliant white light. I could see parts of the arm, but mainly the hand reaching down. And I took the hand and went flying through the clouds faster and faster, and left the earthly plane and was flying just faster and faster. And in the distance there was a brilliant white light, and so we went towards that light, and we just kind of like made footfall on the ground, and the light dissipated from around this being and the area that we were in, and I could see that it was a male figure, and he looked very kind, and I was still holding his hand, and he gestured to walk forward. And at this point, I found that we were in like a small ancient village, a well-worn tract leading into the village. There were stone walls surrounding the homes. They were probably like mud or stucco type housing with stones interwoven, and all the little enclosures around these little homes were very neatly kept. There were families working in their yards, tending to their animals. We walked through this little village. I took in all this scene, and there was one particular family that I just kind of locked eyes with. And I felt that I knew them. I felt a connection to them, like they were family. But the look was so ancient. I knew that I was in a different place, but they still were my family. And I looked at this celestial being, and he looked at me as though he was acknowledging what I felt from these people. And when he nodded, I was back in my parents' bed. It was like the experience was over. I was back in bed. I opened my eyes, and my parents were over me crying. Evidently, they had been trying to awaken me. And when I woke up, they were extremely happy, hugging and crying. And I soon recovered. And I shared that experience with my mom. She had Native American ancestry and was very in tune to the spirit and dreams and psychic phenomena and that type of thing. So I felt very comfortable sharing this. And her message was, that she believed me, but it was probably something I didn't want to talk about outside the home because not everyone would understand. But I felt different after that experience, like it had changed me just in a physical way, because I soon found that I could will myself to leave my body kind of on a regular basis and experience that feeling again, but I was not leaving the astral plane. I was staying within the Earth's astral plane, particularly around this mountain that was near my home. So that went on for about 4 or 5 years. And over time, I guess, I just stopped practicing for whatever reason. I grew up, as a young child. But that experience, when you have something like that happen when you're that young, it changes the way you perceive the world around you and how you think about things as you go forward. So I was definitely on a different path than most of my friends at that point. I felt secure and knowing what happened to me. No one tried to doubt it or discourage me from thinking beyond that experience. And so yes, I was very fortunate. It's a shame that most children don't have that supportive environment, so I was very lucky.
And then I know that in 1990 you've had another NDE and you've had another brush with death, essentially. What happened then?
Yeah, this was a bit more serious. I was finishing up undergraduate school. It was my senior year. I was about 2 weeks from graduation, very stressful. I was also waiting tables at a local gourmet restaurant, lunch and dinner shifts, studying, going to school. So life was crazy. And I'd had a history for a few years of an ulcer. And I was taking medication, but at this particular point, I was at the restaurant. It was a Friday night, and I had run out of my medication. My ulcer had begun to flare, and I didn't have my medicine. So I was drinking milk, trying to coat my stomach, and wasn't even sure I was going to get through the shift, the dinner shift. But I guess around 10 o'clock that evening, I just felt sort of a slight pop in my stomach. And to that point, my stomach had just been killing me. I was like doubled over. I wasn't even sure I was going to be able to finish waiting on my tables. And when that pop occurred, the pain left. I thought, oh, great, I feel so much better. I finished out my shift. The next day, I did some work in the yard, went out to dinner that evening with my husband, and I didn't feel that well. I had a pretty fierce headache and a little bit nauseous, but it was a special dinner that, I didn't want to disappoint him and not go. So we went to dinner, came home, and I became really sick. I threw up, and there appeared to be blood. But I'd had red wine for dinner and a cherry sauce with my entree, and I even called my husband in, asking, do you think this is blood? And he said, well, you did have the red wine and the cherry sauce. And I was like, yeah, that's, I don't know, when you're extremely ill, sometimes you just kind of get stupid. I'll get a little tickle in my throat and run to the doctor, but I'm bleeding out and I'm in denial. Who knows? But anyway, so I went to bed. And the next morning, my husband got up about 6 to go to a flea market. And I heard him get up, but I was so tired and thirsty. I felt like I'd hiked through the Sahara Desert. I mean, I've never been so thirsty. And he wanted me to go to the flea market, but I just told him I can't. I just don't feel well. I'm just going to sleep in. So I heard him downstairs, and I wanted just a big glass of soda. And so I managed to get out of the bed, yell downstairs, asking him to bring me a soda on his way back, turned to go in the bathroom, and that's the last thing I remember. He heard me fall, came up, found me on the floor, collapsed, not breathing, my eyes kind of rolled back. He managed to pick me up, put me on the bed, begin CPR, but I was gone. At that point, I was no longer on planet Earth. I was standing on the edge of a snow-capped mountain range. And I looked down, and there are my feet, standing in the snow, and down below was the most beautiful valley, just an emerald green valley as far as you could see off into the distance until it ended into another snow-capped mountain range. And so I'm standing there looking at all this beauty, and the sky was so incredibly blue. It's like the Kármán line where the Earth's atmosphere ends, and it's just that deep, deep blue. That's what the sky looked like. It looked like I was on the verge of outer space. And, you know, people say when you go to the other side, you can't describe the beauty and the colors and how you feel, and it's really true. It's indescribable. But I was so happy to be there. I brought none of that from the physical plane with me. I wasn't even thinking about the physical plane. I looked back at this green valley, and there was a huge tree in the very center of this valley, and it spoke to me as though it was the tree of life. I just felt like, oh, the tree of life. And as soon as I had that thought, I was under the tree. And I didn't go, during this experience, I never went through a tunnel. I did not see any deceased relatives or loved ones or friends. I only saw animals. I was surrounded by every animal imaginable. It was like a biblical scene in the Garden of Eden. You name it, that animal was there. And the birds singing, it was so loud, but it was like a symphony. And I felt love coming from the singing and from all of these animals, just this sheer love and joy of just being there. And amidst all of these animals, they just kind of parted, came my Rottweiler. I'd had a 14-year-old Rottweiler, Holly, who passed away on that Thursday night before the Friday night at work. So she had been gone, you know, less than, I guess, 3 days at that point. But she was no longer 14. She was like 2 or 3, and she was shiny and healthy, and her little hips were wagging, and she was so happy to see me. I remember falling on my knees and hugging her and crying, and she was licking the tears from my face. And I mean, it was real. I could feel her. But off in the distance, I hear my husband calling me. He kept calling my name over and over and over. And I didn't want to give in to it. You know, it was starting to irritate me that he's like messing up this really nice thing that I've got going on here. But he sounded frightened. And as soon as I realized that, I just came like I pulled away from that scene. It got smaller and smaller, and I just kind of came up to consciousness. And he said, "Don't move, the paramedics are on the way." And at that point, I have what I call a split in consciousness. Part of my consciousness left my body and went to the ceiling, over to the doorway near the staircase. And from that position, I could see the paramedics. I could hear them coming up the stairs and over to the bed. And they began, putting the ECG leads on, the blood pressure cuff. But I'm also in my body. I can feel them doing these things. I couldn't open my eyes, but I knew that there were people around me doing things. But this astral body is over in the corner watching. So that was really quite astounding, the split in consciousness. And I remained that way as they loaded me onto the gurney, took me out to the ambulance, all the way to the hospital. I was split. And even in the emergency department, when they were working on me, and I saw that they had to code me at one time, and could hear all the alarms going off and the people rushing in. I could see that. But I could also experience it in a physical way, even though that part was becoming weaker and weaker. I was more, at this point, attached to the astral body. So this went on for a while. I saw them take me into the ICU room, start a blood transfusion, and then I left completely. I joined, my physical self joined my astral self, and off I went. And again, it was like zooming through space, and coming to land, I was in a beautiful garden. Again, indescribable, greenest grass you could ever imagine, so soft under my feet, trees and flowers, beautiful sky. There was like a shallow pool that beckoned me. So I got in the pool, and it was like the water was energized. I felt that there was a purpose of me coming into direct contact with this pool almost immediately, because it was the energy that I needed to fully bring me into that dimension. I felt energized, refreshed. I got out of the pool, saw a lovely little garden bench, sat on that, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw like a wispy kind of apparition, and it kept forming until there was a solid figure of a Buddhist monk. And he came walking towards me and sat down next to me, and he was dressed in the traditional clothing of a monk. His head was closely shorn, the hair was shaven. But he's my spirit guide in the garden. When I go to life between lives, he's there. He's one of my guides. And what he told me is that I come to the garden for rest and rejuvenation, and that's part of the purpose of the pool. And when I do transition out of the physical, I always go there first, and then further into that realm to study the healing arts. And I knew that I was a healer from being a very young child. I had healing capabilities, and I think that's part of my maternal Native American heritage. But he reinforced that I am a healer, that I work primarily with plants and animals, but also can be effective with humans. And he walked me to the edge of this garden, and in the distance I could see this beautiful pastoral scene. There were all these animals running and frolicking, little babies, like the lambs and the goats and then the adults, and I walked into that scene, and again I'm surrounded by animals. It was different than the tree of life, but I knew that that's part of me. It was so comforting. I knew that this is where I belong, you know. And I really never gave any thought to my earthly life or body or anything. It was like, this is where I belong. And so I turned, and Hotai is my guide's name. He looked at me, and it was like this nod of affirmation coming from him that, you know, I kind of got it. Okay, this is where I come. This is kind of life in between lives where I learn, but it wasn't my time to stay. And when I look back at that pastoral scene, it was just kind of pixelating out of view and just sort of disappeared. And then I turned back to look at him, and he was turning back into that wispy figure and then slowly disappeared. And then I found myself in my hospital bed, you know, coming to consciousness. My mom was there, my husband, you know, the nurse, they got the doctor. But evidently, I had been in that state for about 72 hours. And what I was told, that pop that I felt was actually a vessel that burst in my stomach. So I had been bleeding out for about, probably about 36 hours before I got any intervention. I lost, I lost over half my blood volume. It was very touch and go. The transfusion was a bit complicated because I have negative blood type, and that was difficult to find. But once they, you know, got enough blood in me, I started to stabilize, and then I returned to consciousness. So altogether, I was in the hospital for about 5 days. And on the way home, everything had changed. I could see beauty and energy in the world that I had never seen before. Not like I'd had that ability as a child to see auras, but they weren't colorful, they were just white. But now I'm seeing colorful auras around plants and trees, and I was just amazed at just the drive home. And then when I got out of the car and was walking on my front porch, I couldn't go in the house. I had to go out and look at all the plants, and we have a 300-year-old oak tree in our front yard that I absolutely love. And of course, I was immediately drawn to that tree, just hugging it and crying because I felt its life. I knew that it was like a living being, and all the plants and everything had that feeling. But my husband was getting a little irritated. He just wanted to get me inside and get me in bed. So finally, you know, I made it inside, but I was completely changed after that, mentally, you know, in a physiological way. I could not grocery shop for like a year after that. I was completely amped up. I don't know if being in that relaxing pool had like energized me to a point that I brought it back into the physical realm. But I could not take cans or food off the shelves at the grocery store because I would be shocked. And you could actually sometimes see like the arc, like hear a pop and this little blue flash. So my husband would have to go with me to the grocery store, which he absolutely hated. So that lasted, you know, probably a year or so. I couldn't turn lamps on in the house or flip on a light switch without blowing the light. If we went out for a walk in the evening, when I would walk under a street light, it would go dim. So I knew that I was electrically charged by that experience. And having laid hands on plants and animals as a young child, I just felt like this is something I need to explore further. So fortunately for me, I was working at one of the top tier medical universities here in the United States. And we had a great complementary and alternative medicine department. So they had offered a healing touch modality to the patients as part of their in-service offerings, which I thought was really cool, that they actually, gave credence to healing. And so I signed up for Healing Touch International and achieved a level 4 certification and worked on patients in the hospital setting. But I primarily now work on plants and animals. I do work on people, when I need to. And, I don't do any miraculous healings, but I do see plants and animals benefiting, like my cats, for instance, who have arthritis, and my plants, my garden plants that may not be doing well, I can increase their vitality. And so I was sharing this with two of the female doctors in that department. And they said, well, it'd be really neat to test that, to see if you actually have energy coming from your hands. So one was a physics professor, and we ended up doing some experiments in the physics lab, having a control and an intervention group of plants. So the plants all started out the same size. They had the same lighting, the same amount of water, but with the control group, I didn't touch. I never touched them. The intervention group of plants, I would work my healing touch over that tray of plants. Well, within a few weeks, the intervention tray was like 3 times bigger than the control tray. So that, gave a little validity to that whole healing ability. And fortunately, I had access to Kirlian photography, which is a magnetized plate that you can put your hand on and actually photograph the energy, coming from your hands and the coronal discharge. And so that mine was quite pronounced compared to others. So it was also substantiated through this method of photography.
How did you manage that excess in energy or that electrical charge for that year when you came back?
I do think that initially it did fade away. I don't think I could have continued like that first year, but over time it did subside to a point I could manage it. And that's when I knew I needed to funnel that energy into something. And so that's why I decided to study the healing touch. So I think that was a great conduit to release that energy and benefit others. And so I think it was a two-pronged outcome in that it did subside after that first year, and then managing this ability through the healing touch. And of course that's been, a number of years now. That happened in 1990. So I definitely know how to control it at this point, although there are times that I still can knock out, technology. If I've been meditating and I might not come out of the meditation the way I should, and I bring too much back into the physical plane, I can still disrupt, some of the electronics around me, but that's rare.
I wanted to understand from your point of view, what are you referring to when you're talking about the healing arts? And maybe if you would like to speak to what do you see the future of healing to be?
Well, I think that the healing arts can encompass any number of things, the healing touch, Reiki, massage, meditation, yoga. So it's, fairly large umbrella. And I've dabbled in many different areas of the healing arts. I've always been very interested since a young child. My maternal bloodline from my great-great-grandmother, who was full-blooded Cherokee Indian, long bloodline of maternal healers, fire talkers, root doctors, midwives. So I think it's in my DNA that, it's come down through my maternal line. And as far as going forward, I think the fact that we're speaking today and people are sharing more and more of these esoteric type of beliefs, that as this, it's sort of like throwing a pebble in a pond, the rippling effect, it keeps going further and further out into the consciousness of the people on the planet. And I do see things starting to change. I've been involved in consciousness theory for about 40 years. And I've seen a real uptick, particularly with, the internet and being able to Zoom and use those types of platforms. We're more able to share these types of abilities now. So I see that really taking off and mushrooming. And I would just encourage people, to really think about what interests them. If they feel a desire to maybe heal through their own energy, to look into Reiki or Healing Touch International, or, I'm sure there are other groups out there that they could study under. But, we all, as a collective consciousness, can come together and maybe one day heal our planet and our society. But I know we have a long ways to go.
What was your takeaway after coming back? Were there any lessons that you've learned that maybe when you were 6 years old you were a bit too young to fully grasp them?
Right, yeah. So I would say the lessons taken from that NDE in my early 30s is that we're all and this sounds so cliche because we hear it all the time, that we're all the same, we're all part of the same, but we really are. I mean, that's the deep message, is that we are all part of the Creator. We're all connected. There's the only division is ourselves, and fear. Fear is what divides us. Love is what brings us together. And that really is the bottom line, is that we're all connected. And the message on the other side is love. We've all been created in love, out of love. Everything around us, all the animals, the planet, each other. So I guess that's the takeaway that I got from that second experience that I didn't necessarily get as a young child. That there's nothing to fear about leaving this physical body. I'm not encouraging anyone to do it prematurely, of course, that, we want to leave naturally the way we're supposed to. But in that natural exiting from this physical realm, there really is nothing to fear. There's only beauty and love and just this wonderful experience awaiting us. And it's different for everyone. I think it's in part shaped through this 3D life and through our connections here on earth and our family and our belief system, because every NDE is quite different. But then they also have the same bottom line messages. And that's you can't describe the beauty or the love on the other side. It's all encompassing, and that is where we belong. This is grammar school. We're here to learn, and we better learn, while we can, or we're going to come back. I do believe in reincarnation, and I think we just repeat until we learn what we're supposed to learn. So, bottom line, there's nothing to fear about crossing over. It's beautiful. Our true calling, our spiritual calling, and then return here if we need to. And I feel that, I'll probably be coming back again. But I'm working hard, to maybe elevate to a higher consciousness. Yes, it's a beautiful thing. And when you're over there, there's no thinking about life here. I mean, it's like behind you, because that's all that matters. That's where you belong. That is truly our true self on that side. Well, I do have a website, PamelaNance.com, and there's an email icon on each page that if they just click the little email icon, that'll go straight to a Gmail account, and they can contact me through the Gmail. I also have a YouTube channel at Pamela Nance 1111, and I have about 15 videos posted about experiences that I've had. So if they want to check out the YouTube channel just to kind of get a feel for some of the stuff that I've worked on and some of the experiences I've had, that might be a good place to start. And then, of course, the website. I have a lot more information and media links and those types of things. Thank you, Sabrina. I enjoyed it as well. And thank you to your audience, who I'm sure are a great bunch of people. And I look forward to possibly hearing from some of them.